Ron Nelms founded Nelms Surveying in 1992 and serves as the principal. Is licensed in California, Arizona, and Nevada. He's a past president of 2018 of the CLSA, California Land Surveyors Association, CLSA Member of the Year in 2015. During his time at Nelms, he has performed countless surveys that include boundary resolution, topographic surveys, as-built, and ALTA surveys. In addition, he is noted for his expert witness testimony, which he presented for us a couple weeks ago. And he is also the author of Putting Big Sticks by Little Sticks. It's a book that he had written for him, kind of his kind of your growing up period of how you became a surveyor. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's it.
Exactly. And Ron did a segment on the geoholics. If you guys wanted to go back and listen to it, he talks about his kind of his book on there as well. He's gifted with 4 grandchildren. For recreation, he likes to play tennis and pickleball and enjoys reading and writing in his spare time. So, as always, Ron, I appreciate your time a couple weeks ago, the last few times, and then you actually get to finish off the last one for this year in 2 weeks. And so I appreciate your time as always. So,
well, thanks for having me back, Trent. I didn't see any hate mail come in on the last 2, so I think
we were good. You didn't get
we're all good. Didn't get beat up too much. Yeah, I enjoy doing this, and again, this is just what you're doing, Trent, is good, really good for the profession. The way I did before, and I still like to do, is I prefer a workshop type format. So feel free, comment anytime. We'll stop. We'll answer the questions if there's questions or comments. I'm like most of you. I've been doing this since 1980. I've started surveying, and now it's started the business in 92. Maybe not most of you. Maybe I'm the old guy, but like most of you, just writing legal descriptions, as we've done a lot of, and feel free to comment if you've done it or if you have any questions. I do have some pet peeves that I've been seeing lately. Some of the younger generation, and maybe I'm just getting old and crotchety, of some things I wanted to go over of that I see that should be clarified. But this say what you want about Waddles' book here. There's some good things people say about it, but it seems like the go-to book where people go to find their questions and answers. Some people have differences of opinion, and that's okay. This is a profession. Is nothing like this is how you have to do it. It's a matter of style. A lot of writing legal descriptions is just style, what you prefer. The key is to get it the same location where you want them to go. I see it as an art. Writing legal descriptions is looking at it and then write something, and then you come back and you put it aside. You come back and look at it and see. You make some tweaks and changes on it sometimes. Yeah, that doesn't look quite right. You redline it a little bit and do your work on it. So it's a lot of times, I come back from ones I've written years ago and I go, oh, what the hell was I thinking on that one? That could have been tweaked a little differently. So, but the way I'm a big, let's see if this goes down. I'm a big fan. My favorite book to read and to is Treasure Island. Just a kid at heart, I think sometimes. And what Stevenson writes in is how he wrote Treasure Island is he drew a map first. He drew this map that you're looking at, and then from that he created a story. And that's what I see as legal descriptions. You're trying to tell somebody where to get to that buried treasure, how to get to it, and there's and X marks the spot. And in his book, he talks about all the adventures of what they're doing, all the human drama that takes place with it, but also there's descriptions of how to find this treasure on and where different lining up from Spyglass Hill to with some trees and different things like that, and clues of how to get there. And that's how I see legal descriptions. It's got all the elements. You got to have all the elements to put in there to find it, to find where it is you want your reader to go to. And So I'm also a big fan of the good, bad, and the ugly, the old spaghetti westerns. You know, Clint Eastwood's one of my favorite actors of all time. It's just he just had the one-liners. You know, you can quote him. Um, I quote him sometimes at the detriment of my girlfriend, who says sometimes, "Oh my gosh, I think where'd you pick that line up at?" It's just, you know, from maybe a spaghetti western or something. But what's interesting, why I pick this movie is there's a it's a description of how to find that treasure again. You have Tuco, who knows where the cemetery is, and he's looking, and the guy who died, I forget the guy's name that was died in the that tells him where the cemetery is, but he knows and he knows where it's at, but he doesn't know the name. And so Arch Stanton was given to Clint Eastwood, or Blondie in this case, and he knew the other elements. So they both had two different elements. Separately, you didn't know. So Blondie didn't know where the cemetery was, but Tuco did. But Tuco knew where the cemetery, but he didn't know which grave. And only after a while he gives him some information. Well, it's Arch Stanton. And so Tuco thinks it's Arch Stanton's grave. So he's digging away and finds out that it's the unknown grave next to Arch Stanton. And so all the elements had to be in place. So he's digging in the wrong spot. So he's digging for the monument, if you will, in the wrong spot because he's been given the wrong direction. So when writing a legal description, it's a story of how to get to the place you want them to go. What is it you're trying to convey to them so they come to the same conclusion you do? You don't want the ambiguities. This is one of my, we're going to go to kind of a pet peeve of mine of this one. This is a county's website. This is a lot of you probably seen this type of map. You see all these squares, and I'm going to point my marker at it, but you see all these these are all parcels in here, right? Well, this was as near as I can tell, these lots were given out. It's an oil field site up in the north of Bakersfield, and these lots were given out, I think, to oil field workers. So they go build a little house or hut and go to work out in the oil fields. Well, it never really came to fruition. There was no water, and turns out all these parcels are landlocked. So many of these end up in tax sales because you can't build on them, you can't do anything with them, so they just end up in tax sales. So people would just default. Well, the assessor's office came in and says, well, we're going to sell these lots. Well, the legal descriptions to all these parcels, and trust me, I went through every one of these. They all started up here at the northeast corner of section 1, and they all went down the east line and went over, all of them. They all started at one common point, even down in this. But the assessor's office, and why they're writing legal descriptions is beyond me. But they came in and says, well, that's silly. Why should we start up at the northeast corner for these lots down here? Let's start at the southeast corner and move up here. Well, they went ahead and stayed with the started at the northeast corner up here coming down. And then they showed these lots. But then you could tell once they got down to the southeast corner coming up, they're not the same description as originally original lot was. So it's important in this case. This is a pet peeve of mine that I see some surveyors doing. They will start up at the corner up here and write their legal for lots 1, 2, and 3, and then go, oh, well, let's start down here. They're not going to end up at the same. This line right here is not going to end up at the same line, especially if this is supposed to be 5280, and that's what they thought it was, and it turns out it was like a 150-foot difference from here, from the northeast corner to the southeast corner. So they created a lot of overlaps and gaps. Talked to the county surveyor about it, and he was supposed to talk to the assessor's office and say, stay with the deed you've been given, and not write legal descriptions, because you just changed the whole description of how these are put out. But it is a pet peeve of mine. If you're going to describe something, you start up at one point and stay with that point all the way through. And if you want to throw your overlap or gaps or whatever down at the bottom or whatever you want to do, make sure it's described. But let me pause a minute and see if anybody has any comments or questions. Do we have any? Is anything in the
Nothing.
chat?
Yeah, nothing in the chat. Nobody's.
Okay. Okay. So let's go. Let's see the next one. The important thing is you want the reader to draw to the same conclusions. And I'm personally, I and this is open for discussions, but I'm not a meets and bounds guy. I don't care for meets and bounds. I try to avoid them. I will write them, but as a last solution, if I have to do it, I will do it. But I like other types of descriptions when describing, and we can go on those more. But I don't know if anybody else shares that same passion, but I try to avoid meets and bounds. And the other one I try to avoid is acreage, the south 20 acres or the south half of a lot, unless it's some sort of aliquot like a government plot or something like that. But those things, the south 20 acres is very subject to interpretation. You know, do you make it parallel to the south line if it's a south 20 acres, or do you run it along an occupation line? I mean, how do you, is it where do you find that 20 acres? So those are vague. And meets and bounds, there's a lot of room for errors. You look at just a bearing. How many possible places can you make a mistake on, say, a north north 0 23 53 west? You can make a mistake on the north. You can make a mistake on the degree. You can make a mistake on the minute. You can make a mistake on a second. You can make a mistake on the end bearing on the east or west or whatever it is. So it's a lot of room for making mistakes. And for me, it's trying to minimize the amount of time where I can make those mistakes. The types of descriptions this is what I came up with. Anybody has any more others that they can think of? Is property descriptions, where you're describing a properties, easements, leases, and even we have jurisdictions, cities, and districts. In our state, we have LAFCO. Don't ask me what that stands for. I'll recall right offhand. But they're the jurisdictions that covers everything of what jurisdictions and cities or how boundaries are going to be set, from elections to you name it. But there's those descriptions. Sometimes when you're doing an annexation to a city or a district, you're into like a water district or something like that. Any other descriptions anybody can think of, let me know. Let's just speak it out. The types of descriptions is, or the typical methods of those descriptions is meets and bounds, and I've already gone on that. That's where you're starting at a point and you're going along a course, a bearing distance to some and around or wherever you're going to go. Those meets and bounds. There's aliquot, and I term aliquot as mainly government plat, government lands, where you're the southeast quarter, the southwest quarter section, whatever it is. And then the other one, bounded by. I tend to like some of those where you say it's bounded by the north line of the following described line, bounded on the north by the following described line, or bounded by the north line of a lot or a subdivision or a tract or a section. So directionals. Now those, I call this directional. That's like the south 400 feet of the west 600 feet, something like that. Those are what I call a directionals. those I came up with. And again, anybody else that has anything, another type, welcome the input. This is going to be quick if we don't get questions. So, and this is for the questions. I see this as a mentoring that, especially those who won't have a. Let's see, we have a.
Yeah, Dan told you what LAFCA is. Local Agency Formation Commission.
I figured Dan would come up with something there. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Dan, by the way, can you find out, you see any other descriptions you might have in there? Seeing at the city, you probably come into that a lot, or at the county.
No, I think you got, I didn't, nothing popped into my head. I mean, you got lot line adjustments and everything, but.
Yeah. If I didn't know, Dan is the county surveyor for Ventura County. The types, where am I at? Chapter 3. Now I pulled this out of chapter 3, and this is words or phrases that are used, and even these little words, got to be careful. And I think that's Waddles was trying to say, is be careful with these words and how they are termed in a description. The simple word of to, you're going to, it's to is a direction. So you say to the river, okay? If you say, well, you're going to go bearing of east 550 feet to the river. Well, is that the top of the bank? Is that to the center line of the river? Is that edge? What do you mean by to the river? Or choose anything, to the side of a barn, or whatever you want. What is it? It gives a direction. To what are you going to? So the word to, in my mind, is a direction. You're going to something. Between, it's oftentimes, and I've seen this between like section lines, like between section 8 and section 9. That's fine as long as clarified, but between can mean a gap. You're going, let's say you're going between Jones's property and Smith's property. Well, if there's a gap, you just got to be between the line. Or if there's an overlap, what are you going to call out when you're going to it can mean something between, or something inside it. There could be a gap or an overlap. Or are they the same line? So when writing it, got to make sure you're being clear that you're going between a line, a lot, some sort of lot, or whatever you're going between, that there's only one position for it, that the same. Or maybe you do want it to go between two, but just make sure it's clear. The word can really mean something. From, again, it's, are you coming from the Midwest? I'm coming from the Midwest. Well, what does that mean? Where in the Midwest? Are you going to be in a city? How far do you want to go down? Do you want to go to the street? I'm coming from some address, the corner of a lot, or the corner of this address, or it's got to be specific with one location. I'm coming from the northwest corner of the section 5. Be specific as per the government plat. Be as specific as possible of which one you're coming to, especially if they could be double corners. Another word, on. It's being, a simple word is being on. Is it being on the east line of the section? So be specific. Where on the east line are you? And then you're going to a point, using the word to a point on the east line, being, you just say to a point on the east line of the section, but may call out how far you are from the section corner. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it's got to be clear of where you're coming from, or where you're going to go on that line. I've seen this too, and I'll just make a quick point on that. To a point on the line. Now, some people would say that you may specify it by saying I'm on a point on a line. Okay, To me, it's saying I'm going to the east line. I'm going on that line. Some people like to put that to a point to make it a little more clarifying that I'm a single point on it. You're always parallel with a line. You're not parallel to a line. That's the key. That's a kind of a pet peeve. It's not parallel to the section line. You are parallel with it. Waddles points that out too. And that when you write something, you always go parallel with a line, not to it. I'm trying to think of where you would go parallel to, but going back to the definition of to, you're going a direction to something is the way I put it in my mind that is parallel with. Somebody in the chat said, Jesse said, there's center line and strip these descriptions. I'm assuming that's what he's talking about. Yeah.
Yep.
Descriptions by exceptions are a real pain sometimes, especially when they spell it accepting. ACCEPTING, accepting. Yes. Yeah. Make sure your spelling's correct. Yeah. Perpendicular to, not perpendicular with. It's a good point, Jerry. Very good point. You're going to go perpendicular to. Yeah. It's a directional. Along, adjacent, adjoining, and contiguous. Definitions. These definitions, all of them, Waddles points out that they could be in proximity to the line. They're along. Are you on that line? Are you just running along parallel with it? Or are you meandering back and forth with the line? Are you adjacent to it? And adjoining are all the same and contiguous. They may not be exactly on the line. So you got to be clear. You're going to go on that line if that's the line you want to do. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to be along the line in a general direction. So be clear. Those are words that can get hung up if you're not careful. Another one is what Waddles preferred to use is contiguous. Along a line contiguous with. He said that it seems to be a better fit when you're running along, want to go on the line. Any questions so far?
You got a couple more jumped in the chat there. What does
okay.
along mean? Next to or on it, right? Goes back with that conversation you were having. Commences or begins.
Yeah. Along is, it could be, Waddles points out that could be, it may not be on the line, but you got to clarify that you're going along and on that line, or on that line if you want to be on that, especially if there's an ambiguity. You might cover this later, but I want on it. Says, Cindy says, you might cover this later, but I'm working on a job that starts at the north quarter corner, gives a bearing and distance from the northeast section corner in the description, then meets and bounds around the boundary to finish the description. The north quarter corner is and has been underwater. Does it matter if I start at the property controlling corner that runs through my boundary, or do I start back at the northeast corner, stick the already written north corner? Yes. I'm not quite understanding exactly it. Cindy, could you come online and ask the question? I'm not quite grasping it here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a boundary that starts at the north quarter corner, but it's underwater. So I'm rewriting it because it doesn't, just because it's a property, we're splitting the property. So I need to write a new description, but I don't want to start it where you can't occupy it. Can I go to the north?
Yeah, does it start there, or does it commence there, or does it begin there? Is the section corner part of the property?
It's the northeast corner of my property.
Well, so the monuments, you can't get to it. It's still there in the water?
No, it's in a lake.
It's in a lake, yeah, but I mean, you can't get to it because it's in a lake.
Right, there's nothing there. There's property controlling corners around it.
Okay, but the monument itself you think is still in position?
No, it's not there.
It's not. It's missing. Okay. Yeah, that's a toughie. I mean, you need to go, but you can't give away property that you don't own. So if your boundary is that north line of the section, you can't go past that line. So your description's got to have to say, well, you use your basis of bearing. You don't have a basis bearing between that quarter corner and that section corner because you can't get to it. You could call it's just an idea. I mean, I don't have a final answer to this, but I have to look at it more. But maybe something where you start at your northeast corner and you make a call to another corner that had a tie to that quarter corner, and then along, make your calls along the section line, because you can't get property you don't own. And you could do some sort of, and make it clear that in your description that what you're doing, I'm calling maybe the east line of the section, which is a bearing of such and such from a previous record of survey or something. It gets kind of wordy, but it just, you can't go past the line if you don't own the line.
Right,
you-
I am
Is my
calling out my lines, but can I start at a property controlling corner? Because that runs through my boundary.
I think if I understand your question, I think you can. You just have to make calls to your previous deed.
Okay, I
So,
can do that.
so you make calls to the previous deed so you bound it, like say bounded on the north by the north line of the section. You can call from, say you go from your east quarter corner or your northeast corner, go down the east line, then over, and then up to the north line. You make your error into the north line of that section. It's
Yeah,
where do you want to
yeah.
throw it at the end?
You gotta be
Yeah.
real careful when you rewrite a description so that you don't wind up changing the intent. And
Yeah.
like what you were saying with that line, when you call for that north line, referring back to the previous, always call for the document that it's defined in, because you want to
Exactly.
define it as the quarter corner as defined in such and such a document, not just in general terms, because who knows what's accepted as a north quarter corner today versus what it was, the condition that when the description was originally written. So you gotta be really, really careful when you rewrite that to make the connections back, like you say, back to the original document. So that the intent is paramount all the way through there.
Yeah, that corner is recorded, so I put the Librem page
Yeah.
of the corners, all three corners.
Thanks, Jerry. Question from Jerry. Commences or begins? Yeah. What my comment was with respect to Cindy's question. Okay, commences or began. I think you answered that. The witness corners. It's a question from Lori.
Yeah, was there earlier on and this is probably a good time to bring it up, but Sean had asked, how do you describe a meander line in a legal description? Since we're kind of talking about lakes and waters, like I don't know if you have a whole section on meander lines or not, but maybe we could talk about meander lines, but
yeah, we can talk about anything we want, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Meander lines. Okay, what's the question about meander lines?
Yeah, his was just, how do you describe a meander line in a legal description? So
it is, yeah. Somebody said what it is. I probably need a little bit more to look at to see on the meander, but as long as you're calling it out as a meander line, you're saying, well, come along here, and you just got to be very clear of what it is you're describing. You want them to. It's not a thing where you're trying to hold back things and keep it a secret. You want the reader to understand and to get it. So if you can do a meander line that, here's my meander line as it described, which is, and you want to make a call as to where you want to go to that river, or meander lines are not necessarily show the line of ownership, but they are meander lines just to get you to know where you're going to. So
yeah, one way that you can do it is on the line approaching the water boundary. You give a bearing and a distance call to a meander corner located however far from the shore and the beginning of a meander line. And then bearing and distance along said meander line till you get to your last meander corner and they're terminating. And from there, go back to a meets and bounds description. So you're identifying the meander line specifically. And just as a safety, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, you can also include in the summation said description to include all land between the described meander line and whatever the body of water is. So if there's no separation between the body of water and that meander line.
Yeah, good, thanks. Any other questions there, Trent? Did I miss some?
You
Did
can,
I answer the question? Did we get the question answered too?
okay, so another one, if you want to talk about it, can you touch base on the appropriate use of the phrase "in and through"?
Good. Well, yes. The in, I don't normally see in and through a lot myself. Can you give me an example what you're talking about, Jesse, about the phrase in and through?
The use of in and through comes up a lot when doing route descriptions for transportation lines.
Mm.
When you're running a description that crosses multiple properties.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're going through a property. Okay. Yeah. So what's the question of what the difference between, you're saying what's the difference between in and going through a property? Are you going into a property or through it?
That the use of the term in and through, as well as your comment earlier of to a point on a line, is very controversial when it comes to putting a bunch of surveyors in a room and discussing, what is the appropriate use of those words. Some people say don't use a point. Some people say, oh, you only use the term in and through when you're going, all the way through a piece of property in a straight line, as opposed to maybe having 3 or 4 courses that goes through a property.
Yeah, I would think that, to me, I'm not wanting to get into this big controversy too much. I mean, a big fight, but it is subjective. Legal descriptions can be subjective. To me, when you go in a property, somewhere it's going to end in that property. That's my first thought. I'm going to go into a property. That means I'm not going out of it. I'm coming in and I'm not going out. Whereas through, to me, means I'm going past it. I'm going to come in and I'm going to come out of it. So that's just my first thought. I have not run into this, but I can see where it could be an issue. And it's a matter, again, of describing it to a point that, and all of it, and try to, all legal descriptions that try to do it so it would stand in a court of law. And so it could withstand that test. If it went to a judge, would the judge interpret it the way you wanted it to be interpreted? So yeah, I would say going in is you're not coming out. You're just coming in and stopping, whereas through, I'm going through. That's my first. But I have to see the whole thing in context. I don't know if I answered that, but is there another question here, Trent? You're ready to use?
Nope, you're good. We're caught up.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. The next thing, let's see, this is okay. And I'm jumping. I picked chapter 3 and 11 because you could spend, Trent, you're going to do Wisdom Wednesdays pretty soon on Waddles, and you could spend weeks on Waddles, starting from one chapter to the next. But I just kind of, for this discussion, as I picked 3 and 11, and a lot of people say, and I go back to it, he has his little quirks. Seems to, but it's still the go-to. But you can find them if you have your little, have the little discrepancies of what's written. But here at 11, I would say that you trust but verify with everything that's written here. But what I do is I'm going to start with a map. If I'm going to write a legal description, I draw out a map, what it is. I go back to Stevenson's Treasure Island, and you draw a map, and then you can write your story. A map. He talks about, I drew my map, and from there, there's a wealth of information from my map that I drew. I can make a storylines of what happened here and there. And I go with that kind of mantra that I draw my map, what I want to look like. Then I write my legal description. Waddles goes into these elements that you see here in chapter 11, and this is kind of highlighting it. He talks about the parts, and we'll go into them a little more depth here in a moment. He starts with parts, the forms, the exceptions, sufficiency, beginnings, basis of bearings, and ties and boundaries. So I just kind of get a heads up of where we're hitting with this. As far as parts, he writes, a description of the outline of a certain area is the proper grouping of words which delineates one specific piece of land and which cannot apply to any other piece of land. Very critical. I think this is what should be on the top of the page. When writing a legal description, your legal description is going to describe one piece of land, where it's at. And there's no other possibilities for it to be. That's the goal. To hit that mark is what we're after. There are no, so it's being specific. It is what township, region, section. If you're sectionalized land, if you're not, and you have another piece, where is it in this city? Where is it in that county? Where is it in? What state is it in? What So where are you at on that? No other place could. It's a unique location that it can be pinned down. The second thing he writes, he puts down his forms, the different forms that could be for just, it could be a parcel from a parcel map, such as, or a lot of a subdivision, parcel 1, a parcel map, such and such, parcel lot 5 of tract map, such and such. Portion of a larger portion of parcel. It's a portion of the northeast quarter of section 5, or a portion of parcel 2 of a parcel map. You're starting off with that, so that they can find it. So if you say, well, I'm in the northeast quarter of the section, it's easy to do because there's only township range and what base and meridian it's from. So you're going to be able to trace it down to where it's going to head to. Boundaries, needs of records, citing other documents, and where to find it. It's perfectly acceptable. Somebody mentioned earlier about citing the lake issue that was brought up, where the quarter corner is missing. You could cite the other document that from the previous document is put in place, being a portion of document such and such, also being a portion of section such and such, but you're citing the previous parcel at the very beginning. I'm going to make this a portion of this land, or a portion of this document. And where to find it, and we'll go into that a little bit. Then aliquot or government sections. That's the other forms that you might have. Sufficiency, he talks about the value of the description depends upon its being sufficient and unambiguous. Can you, and here's more of a question, being sufficient and unambiguous, what it means by being sufficient, can you have too much information? That's more of a question. Can you have too much information? I'm opening that up to anybody that would like to answer that. Can you overload this thing?
There's a few head shaking of yes.
Okay, give me an example of what might be too much information.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Well,
Nope,
a
Jerry's gonna
classic,
chime in.
a classic is, I don't want to jump in here too much, but a classic
You're good.
example is when you're including a curve as part of a description, you want to give sufficient information about the circular curve in order to fix its geometry and its relationship to the preceding and the succeeding lines. And what you normally do is you give at least 2 geometric elements of the curve, sometimes 3 as a math check. When you start giving more than that, then you're reducing potential conflict between all those different numbers. And the question then is, if you give 5 elements and they all conflict, which are the controlling ones to define that curve. It's a real simple one of just giving too much information.
Yeah, exactly. I agree, Jerry, that you can. The other one I was thinking of a lot now, a lot is happening. I see more and more is throwing in coordinates on your survey. And so now you have a bearing and distance, and now you have a coordinate from NAD, 80, from some coordinate system. So do you hold the coordinate or do you hold the bearing and distances? So it can get a little, you can't give too much where but you got to make sure that what you're calling out, what's going to control. It's like you said, Jerry. I mean, if you want you've seen those where you have too much information on a curve and you have a radius, say, of 200 feet. Now and there's everything else is in hundredths of a foot. Well, it appears that they want to hold the radius. Now the reader has to interpret this of what you're writing. So yeah, I think you can. You now it leaves it open to interpretation.
A very common thing that I've seen is where somebody has a description that goes northeast corner of section such and such, and then they say bearings and distances around, but they don't tie the two together to make sure that there's identity between those two. Same thing could happen in a lot in a subdivision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's get to there.
I've also seen descriptions where they'll tie a corner. They'll say, okay, that's to a corner, bearing a distance to the the northeast corner. Then down the line, which corner bears bearing a distance to the northeast corner, or they over tie every corner, and the description then becomes almost impossible to recreate because you're trying to track, okay, is this bearing part of the description or is this bearing tying to a controlling point? And so why sometimes those are good, too many of those is too much information because you can't even read it.
Mm-hmm.
Another situation would be if you describe something as a lot in a block in a subdivision tract map and then proceed to describe it meets and bounds. There's all kinds of possibilities for a conflict there, just because the information on the map might not close. The information in your meets and bounds is subject to errors. There's no need to go beyond the lot and block if that's what you're trying to describe, if it's already on a plat and recorded.
Yeah, I agree, George. That's a kind of pet peeve of mine too, that they describe the rest of the lot when there's no need to. It's you described it as lot 2 or whatever it is. That's your lot. You can't go outside of that. But you could, yeah, I agree. Any other comments?
You got a good one in the chat. Is the legal description intended, or I should say, is a legal description intended for another surveyor or lay persons like a homeowner? If it's a lay person, then too much information can certainly be confusing. So
Yep. Know your audience.
Yeah, and then there's a couple other ones about adding too much information contradicts other information you might have in there, right? So
exactly, yeah, and that's a lot of checking to do. It's a lot of checking. I try to make it simple. Beginnings. Waddles puts down a competent and verifiable point must be either in existence or properly established in relation to an acceptable point. Can you give me, anybody got any examples of what he's talking about here? I'm going to go to the back. It's not a trick question. It's just, what do you think he's talking about here?
Well, I would say you need to have a definitely definable point on the ground that's been recognized and you can obviously identify. Maybe it's described in a previous description, maybe it's described on a recorded plat or a map, but you have to have something that you can identify as the point that's being used as the beginning.
Yep, that's what. Yeah, I'm thinking of basin meridians. Your this is the basin meridian, this is the section I'm in, or township, and this is the section I'm in, and this is the portion. So it's starting at some verifiable point, or you northeast corner of lot 14 of a track map. It's exactly, it is identifiable. You know where it's at on a map. It's easily distinguished of what it is. And if you got a double set of corners, you may not want to use that one. Or if you are going to use it, you want to make sure you call out the one you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we were always trained to, make sure it stands on its own, make sure that for whatever reason it's on its own. And, in the power industry, we came across a lot of situations where we're trying to write legals across, multiple properties with, legal descriptions that are very different. And, it's, no matter what the boundary that you're going through, you need to make sure that easement will stand on its own. We were trying to, recreate the wheel and fixing all these boundaries. And finally they just said, you know what, just tie it to 2 section corners. If you're in a subdivision, tie it to 2 lot corners or centerline monuments, and make sure that the next person can go out there and find it with real monuments in the ground.
I think that's exactly what he's trying to say here. The beginnings, basis of bearings. It is advisable that following the point of beginning, there should be established by recitation of a bearing. For example, you're starting at the southeast corner of section 5, and you're going north bearing along the east line of section 5. That is now your basis of bearing. You're saying, I'm going to call up, or the one used earlier, if you decide where the quarter corner was in the lake, you say, well, I'm going to start at the northeast corner, then south along the east line of the section, or on the east line of the section, however you want to word it, a distance. Thence, now that's your basis of bearing, is that you got 2 known monuments. You have to, have 2 known monuments in where they're going to be, the northeast corner and the east quarter corner in that situation. So any questions on that one? A basis of bearing sometimes is misunderstood or confused of what a basis of bearing can be. Okay. Typically, it's 2 known monuments. When I say typically, I think there are situations where you can use a basis of bearing as long as you can establish that basis of bearing from some other known points. But you gotta, be able to just make sure it's described.
I like that. Jerry's got a nice comment in there that pretty much sums up the conversation tonight. You compose a description from the perspective from which you would interpret it later. Since we use the rules of construction for interpretation, use them also for composition, right?
Yeah, good. That's it. Well, we're done then.
That's it.
That's it. The next one, ties and boundaries, and what it says, be sure that the things to which ties are made exist with validity. So what is an example of a tie or a boundary? One of the things it's known and established is like lying 30 feet south of the center line of some road. And it's to a point that is 30 feet south of the center line of the road, and then along a line, on a line that's lying south 30 feet of some road. That's a tie. There's an example of other ties of known points. Make sure that they are known. Anybody have an example of some others? That's one that came to my mind. I'm not seeing anything. Nothing. Okay.
Nope.
Well, we clarified that one. When referencing docs, cite where to find it, i.e. courthouses, county surveyor office, county recorder. I think this is one that I put in. I don't think this is Waddles' interpretation. I think this is Ron's advice. If you're going to say, common thing is, well, it's document book and page such and such. That's it. Well, what county? Where do you find it? Or sometimes it could be at a courthouse, or where do you find this document that you're calling out? It's at the, I had one where it was at a water district. And sometimes you can get that map and take it to the county surveyor and says, hey, can you put this in some miscellaneous map? And so we get this recorded so that we can find it at your office, at the county surveyor's office. But sometimes you can't, they don't have that set up. But make sure you put down where you're finding the document and where it's at.
Another thing to consider there is the date of the document, because for example, here in Washoe County, we have a double set of books. They started over in 1964. If you don't know that and you have a document number from previous to that, you're going to find something that is not even related to what you're trying to find and use. So a date is also important.
Yep. Yeah. Date. Yes, exactly. So put the information that needs where you got to find it. Make it clear. You want them to find it. Okay. We have, here's Ron. This is my tips that I would give to a young surveyor of how to write it, or even older surveyors you want to take it. But this is what I try to do on every legal description that I prepare. I write a draft and I walk away and I come back later to review it. So I write it, I get it, you print it out, put it in the to-do list, and I come back later in the day or the next day and look at it. And oftentimes I will find something that is not quite right. I like I said, I liken my legal descriptions or the work as being an artist. You know, you draw a painting, you get it, or you write something and you get it, and then you walk away and you come back and go, that doesn't look right. And then you redo it, you massage it. Oftentimes I find a lot of my own mistakes by just walking away and then come back. Have someone else look at it. You write it, have somebody in your office say, hey, can you take a peek at this and see if you see anything? Don't be afraid to do that, because this is going to be a legal document and people are going to use it, and egos stay at the door. So at least in my book is that they stay at the door, let somebody else look at it, critique it. And it's also for the younger surveyors, let them look at it to see if they see anything. And it's a good way to mentor, I think. Or they write it and then you critique it. Especially in meets and bounds, I call them parcel calcs. You may call them something else, where you print out a list of how you went around and you're reading it, the parcel calc, or somebody's reading it and the other one's reading the legal description and following along, especially on meets and bounds descriptions, that you don't get a bearing. You know, north, read it out, north 0 degrees, 12 minutes, 14 seconds west. You know, you can pick up those little things. You might have put an east in there instead of a west. And you catch a lot of those, especially meets and bounds. They tend to bite sometimes if they don't get them correct. And have someone else plot it. So somebody else in the staff, you take your legal description, you have a little map, they take it and just plot it off someplace else over on the side without your little, sometimes we call them exhibit A and B, where A is the legal description and B is your plat. You take the plat, put it to the side, have them say, hey, just take my legal description and plot it out what it's supposed to look at, and see if you get the same thing. Just a couple of techniques to use. That one I don't use a lot, but I thought I put it down as an idea. Anybody else have any other things about any quality control, any of the veterans there, what you like to do when you write your legal descriptions, and to help the youngsters to interpret, help them out?
Go for it, George.
Well, one thing I found that really helped me when I was starting out is develop a format that you use for writing meets and bounds. Describe a line course the same way almost every time. Determine a basic format for describing a curve or a non-tangent curve. So that you're not worried about thinking about the words that you're going to write down. All you're thinking about is plugging in the data that's pertinent to that course. That takes a lot off your mind. You're not doing more than one thing at a time. The other thing I like to do is I type out north and east and south and west, because that gives me more of a chance to make sure I'm putting in the right information. If I just put an in, that's pretty easy, but sometimes it leads to mistakes. And that's one of the things when we used to draft maps by hand, I was taught every line has a bearing and a distance. But if you do all your lines as north and east or north and west, you eliminate half the mistakes.
Good point.
So it's just simple things like that that can make life easier for you along the way, and it helps you avoid mistakes. And your points here are all right on. I mean, if you don't have somebody else looking at it, you're making a huge mistake.
A couple of things I've told my students in writing legal descriptions is to avoid sticking in additional words that add nothing to the description outside of length, unless they're charging by the word. A distance is pretty much redundant. You don't need that in there. And then if you're going bearing a distance to a point, bearing a distance to a point is redundant, because when you're putting in to, you're putting the reader on notice that you're calling up a controlling term. Well, a point's not a controlling term unless you define it by ties. Yes. And the other thing that the older surveyors might do workshops, they're starting to drop this one, but curves, concave northwesterly, all this kind of crap about concavity or convexity. It's a curve to the right or a curve to the left. That's all it needs to be defined as. We don't normally use concave and that type of thing. One other thing that's real handy when you're writing a description, because what it is really is basically a long sentence. With each course, it's separated by semicolons. It's a big sentence with a bunch of independent clauses and that type of thing. It's really easy in a long description to lose track and drop a course. What I always have the students do is write each course on a separate line so that there's a space in between there so they can visualize it and make sure it's all there before they collapse it down into a more compact version. And I like George's idea about writing out north, south, east, west, because you're less likely to type something wrong when you're spelling it out, as opposed to an abbreviation, that type of thing. So it's a little bit more work, but it's a better guarantee that the quality of the description that you're writing, that you're actually saying what you intend to say, and somebody else is going to interpret that way. And I've used examples in some of my courses before, and I think I've used them in this class here, where I look at a description and there's a bearing call that uses feet and inches because somebody's interpreted the seconds and the minutes symbol as feet and inches, because somebody else took and rewrote that and that type of thing. Should we write out degrees, minutes, and seconds, or deg, min, sec? I don't know, it's one of those personal preferences types of things, but if you write out that way, for certain they're not going to misinterpret it.
Jerry, I'm a fan of leaving each course on a separate line. I don't believe in condensing it because it makes it so much easier to follow a legal and to plot it out. You see these old legals where there's a giant paragraph and you've got 15 courses in there, and like you say, it's way easy to get lost and forget one.
But every now and then somebody's going to complain about the extra $2 they got to pay to record an additional page at the Register of Deeds office, because that stupid description goes on for a long. If you collapsed it, it would all fit on one sheet. Yeah.
You need to talk to your reporter. We have a flat fee for recording documents here in Washoe County, and it's $43, and they don't care if it's one page or 15.
We haven't reached that degree of sophistication yet here in Wisconsin. It's still cold here.
Well, one of the things I like to do, and it just because I'm a bit anal retentive, is I like to stay in a clockwise direction. So I'm going around. I try to stay consistent. And it helps me anyway to do that. Some people want to go counterclockwise, whatever, but I try to start always at the northwest corner. I pick something. So I know that's usually what I do. So when I read a legal and see if it's mine, did I write this? I usually try to start at the far northwest corner and then go around. Sometimes you can't, but I try to start at the furthest north and west and then work my way clockwise. But that's just me. You can do whatever style you want, but whatever gets you to get consistency, to get it not ambiguous. I saw an earlier quote here, commas can be important. And I think I saw something that's very important. There's a book out, and I recommend everybody go get this book. And it's called Eats, it says Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. And the comma, depending on where you got it, talks about a panda bear walking into a bar, orders some food, and then takes his gun out and shoots a couple of people, and then shoots out not people, but shoots his gun off, and then walks away. And the bartender says, "What are you doing?" And he throws them the book, and it said the definition of a panda bear is eats, shoots, and leaves. Depending on where you put the comma, it interprets that that's what a panda bear does. So, but it's an excellent book on the importance of punctuation. So I'm glad somebody brought that up about commas, because it can be the punctuation, very important, of where you put your semicolons, colons, commas, just all the little punctuations to put it. They do mean something. A lot of wars have been taking place because of misinterpretation of punctuation. I'll leave it at that one. But any other comments we have? In fact, I'm at the end here, but if we have any other questions or comments, they're very welcome. Anything in there about the chat room we need to go back over, Trent?
No, I think we've pretty much covered most of them as I've been talking about them. I do like the spelling out as well, right? Like, how many times have we done kind of the rules of construction or interpretations, and if somebody just put S in the photocopying of it from a 1920 doc, you can't tell if it's north or south or east or west or whatever, right? So spelling that out helps with trying to guess what that directional was. So that's always a good one. But
and your fonts, as I get older, I look at an L8 font, L80 font sometimes, or they try to squeeze it to an L60 in some maps or something. I'm like, I can't read that, especially if you're reducing the size and you get down to the 5th, 6th generation of copies, you can't read them. Yep. So make sure your fonts are clear whatever you're going to write.
Our recorder will record anything you present because they're required to. But if you're using less than a 0.1 font, you're asking for trouble, because they're going to add a little page on it that says it's potentially illegible, which doesn't make you look very good.
You gotta be real careful also using any of the automatic description generation software that's part of a lot of software packages, because that has a particular template and the style that it uses. And again, if you want to put in appropriate controlling terms or change the intent of what a particular line is, it's easy to fall into the trap of letting the software generate a description as opposed to you having more control over that. I've got a description that I use as an example where they ran it all the way around, and then they didn't balance the traverse because the enclosure was so small. Well, the very last course of the description, it reads like Ben said, it gives a bearing and a distance of like 0.024 feet. Well, it's ridiculous to have that even in there. That brings in the question of what's the quality of the rest of the description if you've got things like that are in it. So you got to be really, really careful when you use software to generate a description.
What about is Ron? I mean, I've had legal descriptions kicked back by real estate people before because it didn't have an acreage on it, and that's always kind of been a discussion point.
Of putting acreage on the end of your description. My feeling is that it's not the final call. To me, it's as long as it's not the final call, because most interpretations aren't on acreage or the square footage, but it's a good check. I know why the realtors want it. They want to know how much acreage they're selling, so because they're selling per the acre, or the square foot. And so
what about putting a plus or minus on that? in the legal?
I'm not big on plus or minus, more or less. I'm not real big on to a line more or less unless I don't know it, unless it's very vague of the distance to that. Unless I want to make sure my more or less is that's where I want to put my error. Same thing with the more or less acreage. I tend to go like if it's 23.15 acres, I'll say 23.2 acres. I round them off.
Right.
And so instead of going more or less, that's just my personal. Again, it's interpretation. What do you want the reader, the people? It's going to be conveying title, so you want to make sure it's not ambiguous. So if the acreage is important, now if I'm in downtown San Francisco, a square inch is a lot of money, and they want to know that square inch. So yeah, you want to get a little tighter. But if I'm in Podunk, Bakersfield, and I say that tongue in cheek because it's a great city. Come and visit us sometime. But if you're out in some place in the desert or something, and the land isn't worth that much, go with what you're comfortable with, what your confidence is. I don't know. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, because area is at the bottom of the list on rules of construction. Unless it's a controlling term, you really don't need to put a qualifier in it says, plus or minus or whatever. Plus, half the surveyors I've seen use that term, use it incorrectly. They'll put down said parcel containing plus or minus 24 acres instead of 24 acres plus or minus. Those are two totally different things. And if you're going to put that in there, use approximately instead. Don't call it plus or minus, say approximately 24 acres. But like I said, unless it's a controlling term, rounding it to a lesser level of accuracy, like Ron says, do it that way, 23.4 acres. That's sufficient. That gives the realtor then an idea of the magnitude of the area that they're dealing with, but still it doesn't act as something that's going to override a higher element in a description.
I agree.
Keep in mind that realtors can write these legal descriptions too in our state. I don't know about everywhere.
They can pretty much, anybody, a dog can write a description and it can be considered legal and that type of thing. The problem is everybody's got to write and can write them, but we got to be the ones that figure out what in hell they're talking about. So and when you look at the rules, and I'm sure this is the same in other states like it is in Wisconsin, surveyors have specific rules that we have to live by when we write a description. Nobody else does.
Yep.
Yeah, we have to interpret everything that they write.
William, what state are you in?
I'm in Wisconsin. Oh, I'm sorry.
Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Arizona.
Arizona. You're in Arizona. Arizona doesn't require legal descriptions by a licensed surveyor?
Well, yeah, they do.
Oh, they do. Okay.
Well, listen,
they don't.
I have to sign it and stamp it, but a realtor can write it and just, they take my legal descriptions that I sign and stamp, and then they change them and then record it on a split. And then it gets kicked back. And I'm like, that's not my legal description. Well, flat, I mean, it's frustrating, but just so everyone else is aware that you're seeing some legal descriptions that you're, and that's almost, a business opportunity is just, in some of these areas in Arizona where everything is aliquot, some of the legal descriptions are horrendous, and I can't even start the process until we fix the original description. And when you look at the title, you'll see that somebody changed it, 2 or 3 times. And one thing that they always, on an aliquot on a government lot, you'll see, accept all mineral rights below a certain depth and this and that. And then certain, somewhere down the chain that goes away. And then, all of a sudden they'll add it to my legal description. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, that wasn't on the last 2, but somebody saw it somewhere along the line, and, it's scary.
Yeah. It sounds, kind of a segue when I'm going to talk about in a couple of weeks about monument preservation. And I think what it sounds like, realtors need to be educated in why they shouldn't be writing it. And one of the things did for monument preservations, especially in our state, is one of the things that we pushed was educating the engineers, the city engineers, about the importance of preserving a monument. So, it sounds like the realtors need to be educated why they shouldn't be writing a legal description, what problems you can run into, and some stories about how it affected people. So, but yeah, I don't know why realtors doing that. Attorneys sometimes do that too, but yeah.
Well, the best way I found to address that is to do presentations on deed interpretation from a surveyor's perspective to realtor and legal groups. They all need continuing education. Just volunteer to do that and put the fear of God in them when you tell them about the things that you have to do to figure out what people are saying, and then show them examples of the poor descriptions that we have to deal with and the issues. That's the only way they're going to learn about this, is to realize that these are the things that we have to deal with.
Yeah, a lot of it's education. Yep.
I agree with Jerry that surveyors don't do enough reaching out to legal groups, realtor groups, other groups that write legal descriptions, because there are a lot of groups that do this. Some of my favorites are people who work for utility companies, who will write descriptions that you can't take them to the bank. In Missouri, we passed a law only recently requiring surveyors to be the only ones to write descriptions, and guess what? The lawyer community got together and got the thing tossed. So in Missouri, even a dog can write a legal description. I also wanted to comment on the area thing. Either Wattles or Brown talks about area, unless it's determinative, as Jerry just said, is only informative and not determinative. So there's a big difference between the two, and the reason you often add area is, God forbid, you have one of those case studies that you can read in these books where there is a mistake in a description, and sometimes the solution to the problem is then backing into it with the area. So there are times when the area can be useful, other than helping realtors figure out what their commission is.
So here in Nevada, we've been working, at least as long as I know, since the 70s, trying to get surveyors to be the only ones that can really write legal descriptions. And between the attorneys and the real estate industry, we've not been able to do that. So, and we've even tried convincing them that even though we know what we're doing, we're pretty capable of screwing them up too, but not anywhere near the magnitude that they are. My dog and my cat have both written legal descriptions, trust me. And it's, in fact, one of our surveyors here in Reno did a project. I'll have to touch base with him and see if I can get the information, because he was asking for and made a collection of legal descriptions that were totally off the wall and undefinable. And if he's got some of those, you might be interested in seeing some of those. I know they're pretty good.
Is that Byron?
Yeah, no, it's Terry McHenry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
That'd
be a fun conversation.
We know everybody in this state.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen in California, I don't think.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, that's all I got, Trent. If there's nobody else.
No, I love it. And I was actually texting Trent Williams on here because we're, talking about doing this for Wisdom Wednesdays. And I think, we had 41 on here at one point tonight, and I'm like, and such great discussion. So I think for sure we're moving forward with Waddles as our next book for Wisdom Wednesdays, just because of the conversations. And I actually jokingly said, I think we're going to have to do like 2-hour sessions for that one because there's so much conversation and back and forth you can do. So that was awesome. I love it. Yeah. Anybody got more they want to add or questions?
Good job, Ron.
Yeah, it was great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
I think it's good.
All right.
Appreciate it, Ron.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good week, everybody.
Presentation.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Take
guys.
care.